I'm about to explain, I'm sure 99% of all of you already understand, but for those of you that don't, Counter-Strike is a 5-on-5 tactical shooter with two bomb sites, A and B. There are terrorists or Ts and counter-terrorists, more commonly known as CTs. The T's job is to plant the bomb on either site and ensure the bomb explodes. The CT's job is to ensure the bomb doesn't get planted, and if it does, defuse it. During this time, if either team eliminates the entire other team, the round is won. Rounds will be played in 1 minute and 55-second intervals, and each half is 12 rounds. First team to 13 rounds wins. I understand that there are several different game modes in Counter-Strike, but when we get into the strategy portion of the game, this will be the one that I'm referring to. This is also the game mode that is played in competitive. Having settings that make the game easier to play is essential to having a better experience. With that in mind, we're going to go over each one of these to make sure you've got everything where you like. As we go through these, feel free to pause and copy whatever settings you need. First, we have video settings. These first two are entirely your preference. Whatever background you want, go for it. Under that is brightness, and again, entirely your choice, but what I will say is make sure that this is high enough so you're not playing in the dark. For aspect ratio, I recommend for new players to remain on whatever ratio your monitor is, and this also applies to resolution. For display mode, I strongly recommend you keep this on full screen in order to receive best performance. Also, another very important setting is refresh rate. Make sure this setting is set to the refresh rate your monitor is capable of supporting and nothing lower. If you're unsure what your monitor refresh rate is, you can check under the video control panel, if that's the card you have, by right-clicking on your desktop, opening up the control panel, and selecting Change Resolution. Under here you can see what your refresh rate is. Make sure this lines up with your settings in game. Moving on to advanced settings, you can copy everything I have here to maximize your FPS, or you can adjust this so the game looks as good as it can. If you're more interested in these settings, you can find countless videos on YouTube that will explain all of these settings in much better detail than I can. I'm a simple man and I just copied what I've seen on a few videos in order to maximize my PC's performance. For audio, we can change our master volume to our liking. I suggest you change this to whatever you feel comfortable with while ensuring you're able to hear audio even if it's at its max hearing distance. This can prove to be especially important when it comes to footsteps, terrorists lighting Molotovs, or players dropping weapons. Under that, we can select our audio device to ensure it's going where we need it to. I keep my EQ profile set to normal and my LR isolation to 0%. Now for perspective correction, please turn this off. For the first few months I was playing, I didn't realize this setting was enabled for me, and the second I disabled it, it's like I could hear again. For voice mode, I strongly advise you put this one to push to talk to reduce the amount of audio you produce in your teammates' ears and to eliminate the chance of you being instant muted the second they realize you have open mic enabled. With that in mind, you should set the key binding for your push to talk to something you feel comfortable with. Side note, if you play with a lot of friends on Discord, I suggest you also go into Discord and enable push to mute and bind the key with the same one you have set to your push to talk in game. Your friends will thank me later. For your voice input device, you should select whatever your microphone is and not your webcam. And then you can change other player voice volume to something other than 100% if they're too loud. For me, I keep it at 100% because it's a good volume for me. I don't mess with streamlined push to talk and have never adjusted my microphone trigger threshold. These next two settings are entirely your preference. Now for the miscellaneous audio settings, I advise you to turn all these off unless you like menu music. You can keep the 10-second warning volume on if you need help noticing the time of the round if that happens to escape you. This used to be a good setting in CSGO due to the bomb not notifying you when it was at 10 seconds away from exploding, but now in CS2 the bomb starts making a different noise when it reaches that point. You should enable developer console now because later in the settings chapter we're going to talk about some bindings you should set and that will require you to have that enabled. Max acceptable ping is referring to VAC servers you can connect to and what ping you're okay with playing on. If you didn't know, ping is a time in milliseconds that it takes for your device to communicate with the server. This is traditionally based on geographical distance. The ping represents the delay between your input and when the server receives that signal. Under that is max acceptable game traffic bandwidth and buffering to smooth over packet loss. I've done very little experimenting with these settings because I rarely experience latency issues due to being connected via Ethernet. But if you're experiencing some latency issues, I recommend messing with these settings just to see what works best for you. You should select yes to install Counter-Strike Workshop tools so you can download maps from the workshop. These maps will help you develop some fundamentals I'll be showing you later in the video. For HUD settings, most of these are your preference, but what I will say is the bigger the HUD, the less you'll see. I set mine to white because it's less distracting and doesn't bother me like the other colors will. For view large player count, I would set this to yes. This is because it's easier to read at the top of the screen how many players are alive than having to quickly count how many pictures you see that aren't grayed out. Community notifications can be set to whatever you prefer. For team, I have show location and equipment so I can see exactly what my team is working with when it comes to weaponry and utility. I also have show colors enabled. You'll find in CS that people will refer to you as a color rather than your name, as odd as that may sound. Under this is your preference. I have pings enabled and I don't auto mute anyone so I can communicate with my entire team. I can see why people disable enemy team communication, but I really don't mind it myself. Remember the setting if you start being bothered by toxic enemy teams. That or just manually mute whoever is being annoying. I keep animated avatars disabled just to reduce the level of distractions I have when playing. I also only show my friends' avatars for the same reason. I've seen some people enable clean player names, but personally I don't like this setting. I keep spectator map vote number selection method of use number keys, and I have my mouse enabled for scoreboard on secondary fire, which is standard for most people. You can press tab to open the scoreboard, then right click or whatever your secondary fire is set to in order to use your mouse to navigate the scoreboard. You can use this to mute people, add friends, or access people's Steam profile. Everything else in scoreboard is personal preference. For items, the only key changes I made from here from defaults is disable remove silencer so I don't accidentally right click during a fight to enter an animation. I also removed open buy menu with keys, so when I try to span pick up a weapon and spawn, I don't constantly keep opening up my buy menu. Now for radar, which I find to be one of the more important settings, I have radar centers around player. This is my personal preference. You should play around with this one and find out what works best for you. With that said, I also keep radar rotating on. Radar HUD size I keep quite large to help increase my map awareness, but I do keep radar map zoom below the lowest setting to always see the entire map. This is for maps like Overpass, which are quite large and some of the map can be cut off if this isn't so. To reduce this setting to lower than what the menu allows you to do, all you have to do is hit the tilde key and type CL_radar_scale and then set the value to whatever you prefer. I also have toggle shape with scoreboard. This is also just personal preference. Whenever you hit scoreboard, it just changes the shape of the radar to a square. For crosshair settings, which are also quite important, these are my current settings. But for new players, I recommend making some changes while you're learning to play the game. The most important one to change is crosshair style to classic. This setting will allow you to realize when you are and when you're not accurate. This will come in handy when we go over shooting mechanics. As you play the game and start to unconsciously know when you're inaccurate, you should go to classic static. Outside of that, these settings are really whatever you want them to be. Some people like big crosshairs and others like small crosshairs, but honestly speaking, size doesn't matter. Under telemetry, we have settings that will allow us to better understand the performance of our machine and if we're experiencing any latency issues. This can be totally disabled, but if you're like me, you always want to be informed with how your computer is running and how healthy your connection is. I'm going to go ahead and not acknowledge reverse mouse, but for duck mode and walk mode, both of these should be set to hold instead of press. This will make your movement much smoother and faster. I have repeat disabled for zoom button. For mouse sensitivity, this is actually quite important. At the end of the day, your mouse sensitivity should be set to whatever you feel most comfortable at. But as you play more of the game and want to improve, you should consider what your EDPI is. EDPI is a universal measurement that calculates in-game sensitivity with mouse DPI to create an easier to understand metric. All you have to do to find your EDPI is multiply your mouse DPI by your CS2 sensitivity in-game. For example, my DPI is 400 and my in-game sensitivity is 1.7, which gives me an EDPI of 680. This is really low. Most pro players stay around 600 to 1000, which is also really low. Again, I can't stress enough, keep your sensitivity where you feel most comfortable. We aren't playing professional Counter-Strike. One thing I strongly recommend you change from default when it comes to key and bind is select previous weapon and select next weapon. This should be unbound entirely. It will always be faster to just hit the key for the exact weapon you want to use. This setting also considers utility as a weapon, so if you're trying to get back to your primary weapon from one of your grenades, you have to use the scroll wheel and cycle through everything you have just to get to your primary weapon. That, or you could just instead press one key to get back to the weapon that you want. Later in the video, I'll talk about what scroll wheel should be bound to. I also have my grenades set on specific keys for easier access rather than using numbers like 7 and 8. This makes it easier to get those grenades in my hand and throw them. What I recommend is either copying these settings or finding key bindings that work best for you. What's most important is your comfortability. Movement is a fundamental mechanic in Counter-Strike. Even though it may seem as easy as WASD, crouching, walking, and jumping, there is so much more. As you continue to play Counter-Strike, you will quickly realize just how crucial movement is. A lot of the time, poor movement can get players killed in pivotal moments in the game. We'll start from basics of movement and move on to more advanced concepts, which you can learn now and practice later. First is the basics. You're going to use WASD to move your character model, use control to crouch, and shift to walk. It's important to use shift walking to your advantage. Counter-Strike is a game of sound, and when you shift walk, you make absolutely no noise. As you play the game more, the more you'll realize just how important it is to not make noise in some situations. Limiting the enemy's knowledge of where you are and where your teammates could be is crucial for developing solid fundamentals. Along with shift walking, crouch walking does the same. The important thing to note with crouch though, is that when you shoot crouch, your weapon becomes more accurate. You can shoot several weapons faster while maintaining accuracy. For automatic weapons, you can also reduce the variability of recoil. We'll talk more on this subject later, but for now, it's important to experiment with these two and see how you can use it to your advantage in your games. Jumping can seem simple at first in Counter-Strike, but there are several mechanics that go into it. For beginners, I first recommend learning how to crouch jump. This requires you to jump and then while in the air, crouch in order to reach the maximum height your player model can achieve. There are countless jumps in the competitive map pool that require crouch jumping, so I strongly recommend you get this movement skill down first. While we're talking about jumping, we should talk about what key most players have it bound to. I have my jump bound to mouse wheel down, which is a very popular setting for most players. If you'd like to bind mouse wheel down to your jump, you can do so by simply opening up the console, type bind M wheel down plus jump. And if you want to try binding it to mouse wheel up, you can do so by doing the same but typing bind M wheel up plus jump. The most important reason why players bind this to mouse wheel down is to bunny hop. Bunny hopping is when a player is moving and while doing so they're jumping, but before they hit the ground they hit their jump button, which allows them to achieve higher speeds than what the game allows. This is a very complicated mechanic that requires countless hours of practice to do so consistently. I don't expect any new player to be able to bunny hop, but over time you may want to give it a try. With that said, it's absolutely not necessary to know how to bunny hop in Counter-Strike in order to play the game. If you never bind jump to your mouse wheel, then you'll be at no disadvantage. Like most things in this video, it's all about personal preference. Speaking of how fast the game allows you to move, it's very important to note that while holding certain guns, you will move slower. Generally speaking, the larger the firearm, the slower you will move. With that said, the weapon that allows you to move the fastest is your knife. So in situations where you know that you won't run into any enemies, you should pull out your knife to maximize your speed. This same principle applies when you're shift walking. Many players don't realize this, but if you pull out your knife while you walk, you're actually going to walk faster. This short chapter in this video did little to no justice to just how many layers there are in regards to movement in Counter-Strike. If you decide that you want to practice your movement, I recommend downloading workshop maps that will challenge your movement, and I also recommend searching for YouTube content related to movement just to see how far that rabbit hole goes. Arguably the most important part of Counter-Strike is shooting and killing your opponents. It may seem as simple as aim and shoot, but there are a few things that are crucial to know and practice in order to become great at shooting in CS. First, we have to talk about how the game works. While moving in Counter-Strike, you are not accurate. So in order to consistently shoot the opponent, we have to be standing still when we fire. There are not many popular games out there other than Valorant where this holds true. So if you're new to this genre of game, this may take some time getting used to. Headshots are also very important. Unlike most games that just apply 2x multiply for headshots, CS is more of a 4x multiplier. So aiming for the head at all times is key to developing good fundamentals. Also in CS, each gun has a recoil pattern. The crosshair in your settings may be misleading you to believe that when you fire your weapon, the spray blooms like how it does in most games, but that just isn't the case. With that said, I don't recommend for new players to start learning every recoil pattern, but perhaps spend time on this workshop map showing the basic recoil for the AK and Emperor. With that said too, it isn't necessary to learn all 30 or 20 bullets of the pattern, but rather the first 5 or 10. If you haven't killed the enemy within that amount of bullets, it's important to reset for spray. A setting that you can enable to help you learn the recoil of weapons is follow recoil. I personally don't like this setting because it distracts me, but for a new player, I can see how this can be beneficial. Referring back to what I said about standing still when you shoot, it's important to note that when we spot an enemy, sometimes we will be moving. Unlike Valorant, where we can just stop and shoot and maintain our accuracy, we have to do what is called counter-strafing. Counter-strafing is basically us forcing our player model to stop moving entirely by inputting the opposite direction key to stop us in our tracks. The reason why this is because in Counter-Strike, when we release a movement key, our player continues to move for a brief moment. If we decide to fire at that time, our first bullet will be inaccurate. As you play more of the game, it will become obvious just how important the first bullet accuracy is. Take some time to practice this mechanic and you'll see just how quickly you'll progress from a beginner to an intermediate player. Another mechanic we should be practicing is our crosshair placement. Crosshair placement is the conscious attention to where the center of our screen is. We should always aim to put our crosshair where the enemy may be. This is also one of the many unintuitive aspects of CS that takes hours to practice. A good way to begin working on this skill is to start memorizing the maps. Doing so will allow us to better understand where the enemies like to hide and where they may peek us from. It would be a crime if I didn't mention peeker's advantage while talking about shooting mechanics. I'm sure you may have heard this term, but it's when a player comes around the corner and it has the advantage on the player they are peeking. This is because of server delay. The player that is peeking receives information of the player being there before the other player has them completely registered on their screen. This kind of looks like this in practice. A good way to prevent becoming a victim of peeker's advantage is to peek and unpeek corners while you're holding an angle. This way, if someone comes around the corner, neither player or hopefully you have the advantage. Counter-Strike is what people call a right-eyed game. This basically means that when we play, we aren't playing as Mike Wazowski. Instead, the camera angle that we are seeing is being displayed from our right eye. This can be misleading for new players when they think that are hidden from other players. Take this for an example. From this angle, it appears that if anyone were to walk by, I would be the first person to see them and have the advantage, but that just isn't the case. Take a look from the other player's perspective. See how they see them first and the other player doesn't even have them on their screen? To leverage this mechanic in our favor, we have to try and hold angle from the left so the right side of our player model is the one hanging out. This will stop players from getting free kills on you and put you in an advantage. Like I said at the start of the chapter, shooting is one of the most important mechanics in Counter-Strike, so be sure to practice these things if you want to get better. If you want some tools to get better at this mechanic, here are some workshop maps that you should download off Steam so you can start grinding out this skill. You can also check out a website called Refrag that has custom maps to help you develop better crosshair placement. Let's talk about all things from the binding. First, we have armor. At first, it may not seem like armor is as important as it is simply because people can kill you so fast regardless. Believe it or not, it's extremely effective. It reduces the amount of damage taken from all sources. Here's an image I found off Reddit from the user Fuvel showcasing the damage you receive from different weapons. Now here's another chart indicating the armor penetration value of those weapons. To find the amount of damage we'll take from these weapons now that we're wearing armor, all we have to do is take the total damage we'll receive from the weapon and multiply it by its armor penetration value. An example of this would be the AK-47. Its base damage is 35 with an armor penetration of 77.5. This means if we wear armor, the weapon will only do 27 damage per shot. Forcing our enemy to shoot an extra bullet can be the difference between living and dying some rounds. Armor really shines in value during certain rounds where the enemy only has pistols. You can see from the chart that I showed that the default pistols has very low armor penetration value, which means if someone were to body shot you while you're wearing armor, they would do very little damage. For head armor, that's where things get tricky. The same principle applies when it comes to damage reduction, but there are several guns in the game that will one-shot headshot you regardless if you're wearing armor or not. Most infamously is the AK. That is why all pros will drop whatever weapon they have at a chance of holding the AK. These players are very good at one-shot headshotting their opponent, which means the AK provides a significant advantage in firepower. Moving on in the buy menu, we have the Zeus, which regardless of armor will one-shot your opponent, but only if you are very close when it's fired. Unlike before in CSGO, in CS2 the Zeus will now recharge itself so it can be used multiple times in a round. Be advised that the Zeus will take 30 seconds to charge in between each use. Under the Zeus we have the defuse kit. This piece of equipment is very important. Normally without a defuse kit it will take 10 seconds to defuse the bomb once the T's have planted it. This is a very long time considering the bomb is only active for 40 seconds until it explodes. However, with the defuse kit the bomb can now be defused in 5 seconds to whomever has one. Important to note, if a teammate or yourself dies with a defuse kit it can be picked up by any counter-terrorist. It goes without saying, but this item can only be purchased by CTs. I can't tell you how many rounds I've played that have been solely decided on whether or not my team had a defuse kit. Don't be a loser. Buy a diffuser. Let's talk about guns now. In the loadout menu, we have the option to select which guns we want to bring into the game to be available for purchase. My only advice for this is always bring the AK for T-side and the M4A1S and M4 for CTs. Outside of that, it really doesn't matter what you bring. Find out what guns you like using and make sure to have them equipped before heading into a match. For pistols, I really like using the P250, 5.7, and Desert Eagle. Each one of these has a time and a place where they're most optimal, but in my opinion, the most beginner-friendly pistol is the 5.7. The one important thing to note about any of these pistols is that the only one that will one-shot headshot through head armor is the Desert Eagle, which most players refer to as the Deagle. This gun is extremely powerful if you feel confident in your aim and ability to shoot headshots. If you struggle to hit the enemy in the head, the next best thing is the 5.7. It has a higher magazine capacity, a much higher shooting rate, and is more effective at close quarters. There isn't much to note about pistols because most of the time you'll be using more expensive guns. Some machine guns are very beginner friendly due to their forgiving accuracy while running. Most new players will use the Bison due to its very high magazine capacity and running accuracy. Most experienced players when forced to buy an SMG will prefer the MP9 and CT due to its high rate of fire and weapon accuracy. And on T side they'll opt for the MAC-10 or UMP. As you progress and learn more about the game and get better at shooting mechanics, it's important to grow out of only using SMGs. Using these guns you can only get so good at the game and you'll miss out on mastering those shooting fundamentals that we talked about. But if you don't care about any of that stuff, then go for the SMG buy because it is in fact the most effective for newer players. In my opinion, rifles are the most effective weapon in Counter-Strike. This is due to their high level of accuracy, fire rate, and magazine capacity. My personal preference for CT rifles is the M4A1S. This is because out of the two rifles that are considered meta for the CT side, this one has less recoil, is silent at long ranges, and is the cheaper option between the two. There is an argument for the M4A4, but it just isn't the rifle I personally like. Try both out and see which one you like most. For some cheaper rifle options, we have Hamas for CT and Glow for T. Both of these guns in my opinion are just worse options than their expensive counterparts. These guns are mostly designed for when your team cannot afford a full buy and need to force all their money to win the round. For rifles, we also have the AK, which is mine and many others' personal favorite. This is mostly due to its high damage and one-shot headshot ability. For beginners though, this gun can be quite unattractive due to its high recoil and difficulty to control. However, I strongly advise that if you want to play this game for a long time, you should invest some time practicing with this gun. Now for scope weapons, we have the SG for T and the AUG for CT. Both of these weapons are really attractive for newer players because they have the ability to scope in and out. These guns are usually not seen at the intermediate level. Most players prefer to buy the M4 for CT and AK for T simply due to it being cheaper, faster rate of fire, and overall better versatility. But if you're having a hard time getting used to the nuance that is aiming in Counter-Strike, I suggest you give these guns a try. For snipers, we have the Scout or the SSG and the AWP. The SSG is the much cheaper alternative and one of the guns in the CS arsenal that is capable of one-shot headshotting. The only real downfall to this weapon is that it does not one-shot body shot. Instead, it takes 2 body shots to kill an enemy. Other than that, this gun is quite fun to use simply to how fast you can move with it, whether you're scoped or not. Along with that, the magazine size is 10. For a sniper, it also has a significantly high fire rate. Easily the most infamous gun in Counter-Strike is the auto sniper. If you want to be hated by everyone in the lobby, please feel free to purchase this weapon. Jokes aside, this gun can be very useful at lower ranks and against newer players because it is essentially a semi-automatic scout. These guns have a high magazine capacity and a remarkably high fire rate. Towards the much higher ranks though, these guns start to become less effective due to their inability to one-shot as a sniper. Leaving the enemy more than just a few moments to kill you will probably result in you dying more times than not. Lastly, for guns we have the AWP. The AWP is easily the most famous gun in Counter-Strike. It is one of the most expensive guns and is capable of one-shot body shotting anyone wearing armor or not. This gun, however, has very high risk versus reward. If you miss a shot more times than not, this can result in you dying. This is because the op is very immobile and has a very slow rate of fire. That being said, if you invest a lot of time becoming good with the AWP, then you can quickly become a valuable asset for any team. I know I didn't mention LMGs, but that's honestly because I consider these guns to be meme guns. If you like crouching and holding down left click and spraying 150 bullets, then these are the guns for you. The last thing we need to talk about before moving on from the buy menu is grenades. For newer players, using grenades can be quite difficult. My greatest piece of advice I could give anyone trying to get better at using grenades, or what more people refer to as utility, is just keep using them. As you use them more, you become more comfortable with how grenades are thrown and when they're very useful. To throw any grenade, we can left click throw, which is an overhand throw, and will go the furthest. Along with that, we can hold mouse button 1 and 2 to do a lesser overhand throw, which will not go as far. We can also do a right click throw, which will result in you underhanding your grenade. When it comes to using flashbangs, first we have to understand how they work. They're able to totally blind the enemy with a white screen for up to 1.9 seconds, depending on the angle and distance in which the pops in front of the player, and if the player is looking in the direction of the flash. This can result in a window of opportunity for you to kill your opponent. Blinding effects can last up to 4.9 seconds, which includes a fading white screen and a loud ringing sound that drowns out all the noise heard by the player. What you must keep in mind while using flashbangs is their ability to blind everyone. That includes your own team. When you're throwing flashbangs, think about what they're going to lose and if they're going to blind your team. No one wants to be team played. If the enemy team is throwing a flashbang and your team isn't still throwing flashbangs and are often flashing them, you can usually turn away from where the flashbangs are going to pop to reduce the blind time significantly. Smoke grenades that once they have landed will balloon a cloud obscuring vision from those on either side of it. After a smoke pops, it takes 20 seconds for it to fade. Smokes can be incredibly useful and are an essential piece of utility used at intermediate and high levels of play. The versatility that smokes have is incredible. They can be used to block off vision when you're using bomb as a CT. They can provide cover as a T as you plant the bomb. They can also be used to block vision of common spots where CTs like to hold. The use of smokes are honestly endless, and it's very important that you get comfortable using this grenade as soon as possible. Molotovs are very useful but quite expensive for CTs. This is the only piece of equipment that is actually more expensive for one team. CTs have to spend $600 just to buy their incendiary grenades, and Ts only have to spend $400 for Molotovs, which is essentially do the same thing. They're very useful for flushing enemies out of areas or blocking off entry or exit for new players. Most commonly, these grenades are used to stop rushes from Ts and help CTs take time to rotate. Be very careful when using these grenades because if thrown wrong, they can do a ton of damage to your teammates. Next on our list of utility is HE grenades. Unlike most games, HE grenades will not one-shot kill the enemy, but will do a significant amount of damage to unarmed opponents. These grenades honestly don't need much explaining when you use them, but what I will say is, new players often throw HE grenades without any knowledge where the enemy is. My advice for new players is to only throw these HE grenades and almost certainly you get damage. Lastly, we have decoy grenades. In my opinion, this utility is the least useful out of the 5, but definitely have a place in the game. What happens when you throw a decoy is when it lands, it makes the sound of your primary weapon being fired in random bursts. This can be useful at lower levels to confuse the enemy and make them think you or your team is somewhere where they're not. More experienced players are very good at detecting decoy grenades and will less often be confused when they go off. Interesting thing to note about these grenades is when they bounce, they sound exactly like a flashbang. Also, while they're in the air, they are almost indistinguishable from regular flashbangs. At higher levels of play, players will often look away from a decoy grenade once it's thrown, so they aren't blinded from what they think is a flashbang. Don't do this at lower levels. They won't look away. During this guide, I often refer to what things cost. This is because Counter-Strike is an omni-based shooter. At the start of the game, you're given $800. This round is referred to as the pistol round because you're unable to purchase any of the firearms other than that with this money. There are several ways to earn money throughout the match. The most effective way to do so is to win rounds. Keys who win a round via bomb detonation will get $3,500 each player. CTs, if they defuse the bomb, result in each player being awarded $3,500. For Ts, if they win the round by eliminating all the CTs, they are awarded $3,250. Now, in the rare scenario where CTs win by lapsing all of the allotted time in the round, they're given $3,250, and every T that remained alive by the end of the round receives $0. There are some more benefits to planting the bomb. The T who plants the bomb will be given $300, but in the scenario where the bomb is planted but the CTs still win, the remaining Ts, including the bomb planter, will receive another $800 on top of the money received for losing the round. And now that I mentioned that, the losers of each round also receive money. The baseline money received for losing a round is $1,400, but if your team manages to lose multiple rounds in a row, they will receive additional compensation. After 2 losses, they'll receive $1,900, after 3 it becomes $2,400, after 4 it's $2,900, and after 5 consecutive losses, your team will receive $3,400 for each loss. I know this can be a lot to remember, but conveniently for us, if we open the scoreboard, we can always see what our minimum income will be at the end of the round by hovering on the right side. We can use this to help calculate what kind of money we'll have in the following rounds. Now that we have basic understanding of how the economy works in Counter-Strike, we can start discussing money management. At very low levels of play, this isn't as essential because most players will prefer cheaper weapons like SMGs and Scouts, and won't be purchasing utility anyway. At higher levels of play, it's common practice to wait until your entire team is able to purchase a full load. A full loadout is usually full armor, an expensive rifle or op, and 4 grenades with a fuse kit for your CT. This is called a full buy. While your team is waiting to get enough money for a full buy, they may opt for a save route. This is basically when your team is calculating how much money they will have next round by purchasing what they can accordingly so they have enough funds for their full buy. The other most common strategy is a floor buy. This means your team absolutely needs to win around so everyone on the team spends all of their money to buy whatever they can. Constantly doing this every round will more than likely lose your games as you progress and start playing against better players. At all levels of play, it's important to know basic strategy for the game. Hands down, the most effective strategy for teams at the beginner level is to just rush a site. This includes all members of the team running directly to whatever site you want and start blast. As you play more Counter-Strike, you'll see just how often the strategy plays. For CT, a good way to win a full save round is to have all of your members on your team gamble a site and hopefully they don't go to the other one. This is called stacking the site. This gives you and your teammates the best opportunity to win the round. Another strategy for the teams that you may see played a lot is just playing for picks. This basically means spreading your entire team across the map and waiting for the enemy CTs to make a mistake, which creates an opportunity for your team. In my opinion, this strategy will probably work the best simply because CTs will often get bored and start running through the map. As a CT in the lower levels of play, it's important to just remain patient and let the game come to you. There isn't much reason to try and force things when the sole objective for the Ts is to come to you. Don't do half the job for them. With this said though, you'll end up winning most of your games by just practicing good fundamentals and maintaining a level head. Counter-Strike is a competitive team-based shooting. Some people may forget the team aspect of things, but it's important that you don't. Every time you discover something during a round, it's important that you say something to your team. A perfect example of this would be if you're holding B site on Mirage as a CT and there's one T left. If you hear the T running through apartments, you should absolutely communicate with them as soon as you hear them. The most frustrating thing in Counter-Strike is team players that refuse to communicate in team-based games. If you're not sure what you should and shouldn't be saying, just say whatever you think it is that may be important. The experience will guide you in the direction of understanding things your teammates need to know and what they don't need. Generally speaking though, calling out when you see an enemy should always help. Also, if you happen to see an enemy and hurt them, but they get away, you should say one of them is hurt. Same thing applies if you're fighting an opponent and killing them. It can be valuable information to know that someone is hurt on enemy team. I would much rather have someone on my team that communicates too much than someone that doesn't communicate at all. However, a bad call out would be saying something like, they're over there, or he's right there. But how else would you be able to call out exactly where they are? There is this convenient thing in Counter-Strike that is called exactly that, call out. Callouts are named places around the map that have teammates communicate the location of the enemy. If you're a brand new player and have no idea any of the callouts on the map, there's an easy way to start learning them. All you have to do is go to a private match and set it to practice. Once you load in, walk over to the area which you're unsure what it's called, and look in the top left corner where your radar is. Just under the radar will be a name of the callout. Use this to your advantage when learning certain callouts and also communicate with your team and discover what they call those areas. Similar to callouts, map knowledge is something that unfortunately takes a lot of time. But once you start to learn the ins and outs of the map, you'll see just how fast you grow as a player. The best way you can start learning maps is start learning them one at a time. In matchmaking, you can queue for just one map at a time and play only that map for however long you like. I recommend finding a map you personally enjoy and playing it and memorizing it. Learn the callouts, find good lines for your grenades, and start to strategize with your team. When I was a new player, all I used to want to do was play overpass. I felt comfortable on the map, and I knew what I thought at the time was everything I know about it. I'm thankful for the map because it was my stomping ground where I learned how to master all my fundamentals. But unfortunately, if you want to become an even better player, it's important to do this with all the competitive maps. If you ever start playing Premier or Face It, you'll be forced to play all the maps in the competitive pool. So it's important before you head over there that you have a basic understanding of all maps. The unfortunate truth about the current state of CS2 as of making this video is public matchmaking in Premier is filled with cheaters. This is especially true at high ranks of Premier. At the much lower ranks, which is more than likely where you're going to start, there's a good chance that you won't run into that many cheaters. But that also may not be true by the time you're seeing this video. If you feel okay with dealing with cheaters, then by all means, continue to play either Premier or matchmaking. But if you want to and feel ready, I recommend that you try to move over to a more competitive platform like Face It. Face It forces its users to run an anti-cheat while they play. This results in far less cheaters. I know what you're thinking, and probably what others are thinking as they watch this. You don't feel ready to play in a competitive platform like Face It because you don't want to ruin people's games, or you don't want to not have fun as you get stomped out. And both these statements are completely reasonable. But I will say, once you lose a few games, the matchmaking service does a good job of putting you in the elo where you belong. Even as a brand new player, you're probably much better than the lowest ranked player on Face It. And don't be discouraged about playing with better players. Everyone has to start somewhere, and everybody deserves the right to play in a cheat-free environment. I made an entire video on this topic, so I'll just leave it at that. If you want to hear me rant about it for a little bit longer, you can check out this video. The link to that video will also be in the description. When I started making this video, I didn't quite realize just how long it was going to take, nor did I realize just how much effort it would require me to produce quality content I want my subscribers to see. With that said, it took me countless hours to put this together across a span of several days. So if you enjoyed the video, or if you just learned something new, click the like button. It really does help the YouTube algorithm put the video in front of more people. Also, if you want to see more content like this in the future, consider hitting the subscribe button and click the bell to be notified. Thanks for watching.